In my opinion, the best lore to explore within the Warhammer 40K universe is that of Chaos, because it exemplifies the grim darkness of this universe. And today we're going to do a deep dive into the different fleets of Chaos. What do Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Renegades use to travel the warp? What do the ships look like? All that good stuff. But first, let's talk about the origins of these fleets. When Horus and his traitors rebelled against the Emperor of Mankind, him and his legions could each call upon the great armadas of the Armada Imperialis, or the ships of the Imperial Army. This was the way of the times. The Primarchs were the Emperor's most trusted lieutenants. They were the terrible young princes of the Emperor's armies, and all other men were subordinate to them. And because there was no separation between the Armada Imperialis and the Adeptus Astartes, when the traitors joined Horus, they brought much more than Space Marines. They brought war fleets so huge that each could transport the legions and countless millions of minions to Terra itself to confront the Emperor of Mankind. But after the War Master Horus was defeated and his rebellion squashed, the new masters of the Imperium would never let any individual hold so much power again. The great legions were reduced to chapters, a mere 1,000 Space Marines with specialist ships to carry their fighting strength swiftly to battle, and nothing more. And the great battleships that once transported the Space Marine legions were separated and turned into the Imperial Navy. This was expanded enormously. They were made up of disciplined human warriors whose loyalty was solely to the Golden Throne and not the Primarchs and their Space Marines. However, the traitor legions never made such a change. Instead, the ships that fled within the Eye of Terror remained there, ensuring that the forces of chaos are still organized around a respected traitor Primarch or its legion to this present day. The service of such men and women are so valuable to the Chaos Legions that they are assigned a Fleet Master position for the greatest of the War Masters of Chaos. While it's rare to find a ship captain who fought against the Emperor of Mankind 10,000 Terran years ago during the Horus Heresy, it's not impossible. The warping effects of the Immaterium have kept some of these traitors alive and in servitude to their Dark Lords. As servants of the ruinous powers of Chaos, the traitors plundered the worlds of the Imperium and cause as much death and destruction as the Chaos Space Marines that they ferry across the galaxy. These foolhardy ship captains, their crews, and even their battleships become twisted and warped by the so-called blessings of the Dark Gods of Chaos. But the true depravity of these once majestic armadas is how the very material essence of the ships are twisted not only by the touch of their patron god, but by the cultist crew that reshape the vessel to please their master. They will brand great heretical runes all across the ship, covering it in colors, symbols, and substances that favor their divine patron and as a testament to their great devotion. By some foul enchantment and dark rituals, demons, spirits, and other chaos entities that likewise are in the servitude of their patron may be summoned up or even granted whole areas of the ship. They are invited to dwell within their engines, sustained in the material realm by the same bound psychers and warp drive engines that once allowed the ship safe passage through the Immaterium. These beings of chaos might slumber within a warship's guns, launching fire from them with an unnatural fury, or sweep formlessly throughout the ship's deck like a wailing ghost, driving off would-be passengers, or even lurk deep within the hulls of the vessel itself, binding their own ancient malice with the intangible and resolute will of the aged machine, birthing a vessel with a true heart of chaos. Let's start off with the singular chaos god that doesn't give two fucks about commanding the ancient fleets of the Great Crusade. To the chaos god Tzeentch, the mode of transportation his servants use to travel the galaxy doesn't really matter. This god truly embodies the boundless existence of the Immaterium. Tzeentch transcends time and space, existing as a web of past, present, and future, so the mechanical fleets of humanity that operate in a bound linear world are pointless playthings. When the ships under the service of Tzeentch leave the material world and enter the twisted dimensions of the warp, the god of change effortlessly corrupts these metal monstrosities by twisting their hulls into mockeries of what imperial ships should be. The new starships are so bizarre looking that they are referred to as the beasts of Tzeentch. You see, Tzeentch is entertained more so by the passengers of these vessels than the ship itself. His attention is always on the psychers aboard the ships. The hundreds of thousands of crewmen that work to keep these ships going are simply there to be manipulated and used. The god looks into the minds of each and every crewman and collects their deepest fears. He then takes these nightmares and distorts the very fabric of the vessels, mimicking whatever collective horror exists within the crewman's head. The god's power digs itself so deep into man's consciousness that Tzeentch is able to tap into the very primal fears of all of humanity. These ships mutate into the monsters created by mankind when he first set eyes upon the great oceans of Terra itself. The ships of Tzeentch become grotesque leviathans that lurk in the brackish abyss of the warp. Serrated scales as black as the soulless inhabitants of the Immaterium burn with an eerie phosphorescent glow, and from them drips a viscous ichor that trails behind the colossal ships like an etheric ink in the void. Jagged dagger-like naval rams protrude from the bows of the ship, appearing more like demonic tusks or horns than weapons. Tendrils of darkness writhe and slither from the ship's surface. They reach out into the murky void, searching for prey, and reminding the demons of the Immaterium that the beasts of Tzeentch are just as dangerous as any other entity in the warp. Pulsating growths that appear like vile barnacles adorn the ancient vessels. The very essence of the beasts of Tzeentch seem to devour the ambient light, rendering everything around it an oppressive, lightless void. As for the crewmen aboard these vessels, their lives slowly become miserable as the insidious fear of the boundless abyss grows in their minds. This void-born phobia is a relentless specter that grips the victims in a suffocating embrace, dragging them into the depths of their own dread. The afflicted souls stand in the void's edge, their gaze fixated on the ominous expanse that stretches endlessly before them. As they peer into the fathomless deep, a nauseating sense of vulnerability consumes their being, as if the very air they breathe turns to thick, oppressive fog. The rhythmic thumping of the vessel that was once a soothing melody transforms into a siren call that beckons them towards the yawning maw of the warp. And the sensation of weightlessness, afloat in the expanse that knows no bounds, amplifies the helplessness of the crewmen. It is a terror that transcends the tangible, weaving itself into the very fabric of the human psyche. They know they are surrounded by a shadow that stretches infinitely in all direction, an eternal and unrelenting abyss. Now, as the beasts of Tzeentch swim out of the Immaterium, they strike fear and shock into the hearts of those Imperial defenders unlucky enough to encounter their hellish forms. Like the sea monsters of ancient Terran legend, they have become ghastly omens that herald the arrival of doom from the warp. They bring forth surging waves of sorcery and eddies of unreality. The beasts of Tzeentch destroy metal, flesh, and soul with equal ease. Now let's move on to the fleets of the Chaos God whose followers pride themselves in the ecstasy they can conjure, the ships of Slaanesh. Unlike the vessels of the other Chaos Gods, the Prince of Pleasure protects his fleets from the corrosive effects of the warp, carefully and meticulously creating beautiful ships that transcend the boundaries of conventional design. Known as the floating palaces of Slaanesh, any one of these ships stands as the epitome of beauty in the hellish realm of the Immaterium. The exterior of these palaces are a harmonious blend of ancient Gothic structure and the surreal wonders of chaos, giving off not only an aerodynamic but also a graceful appearance that defies the harsh conditions of the warp. A floating palace is adorned with a luminescent coating that shimmers with a mirage of colors never before seen by human eyes. As these etheric hues catch the light from the distant stars, they evoke pure pleasure in the eyes of anyone lucky enough to see them. The coating not only creates an otherworldly aesthetic, but it also serves to protect the ship from the maladies of the warp. A floating palace features large, panoramic viewports that seamlessly integrate with the ship's structure, offering the servants of Slaanesh breathtaking views of the perversities of the Immaterium. The windows are reinforced with a transparent yet demonic-proof material that enhances the passenger's perception while keeping the entities of the warp out. Every inch of these massive ships is adorned with the most precious metals and glittering gems, smothered in the richest and most extravagant of details and iconography. They are decorated with the most exquisite portraitures, sculptures, and art, invariably portraying acts of extreme hedonism and artistic horror. Vessels nearing them might find their voxlings bombarded not by the expected hails of identification, alliances, and intent, but rather by a cacophony of giggles, screams, moans, and gasps, both disorienting and enchanting, broadcast by the fickle followers of Slaanesh, who seemingly are uncaring or perhaps even unknowingly doing so. For those who attempt to communicate, it opens up a channel to a voyeuristic gaze of pleasure beyond comprehension, and to an aura of enticement that would bring the weak to their knees. You see, the floating palace is not a mere vessel to travel to and from the warp, but rather a work of art that captivates the senses and elevates the experience of void travel to new heights. From its exterior aesthetic to its interior design, every aspect of a spaceship reflects a commitment to the fusion of form and ecstasy, making it a symbol of beauty that transcends the boundaries of any earthly design. Now let's move on to the plague fleets of Nurgle. Few vessels conjure as much dread as the putrefied and decaying ships in the service to the Chaos god Nurgle. Known as plague fleets, these massive spacefaring vessels are unlike any other ship in the galaxy. Twisted and corrupted by the powers of the warp, they are rotting away just as much as the carcasses of Grandfather Nurgle's followers. Liquefied rust running like blood across their hulls, cankered and broken power supplies, plasma coils and radiation conduits seeping their plasma like pus. Strange tentacle-like appendages sprouting out into space like living beasts. They fill up with thick clouds of revolting, fat-bodied plague flies that hatch from the walls and bulkheads. When the ship lands upon an enemy world, or their crew boards their victim's spacecraft, these seething fly storms come with them, spreading infection wherever they go. Such oddities and decay defines the vessels whose crews serve the Plague Lord. These vessels come from all over the galaxy. Any void-traveling race unlucky enough to succumb to the temptations of Nurgle are welcome in with joyous praise as new chariots of disease and pestilence. There are, however, two very common ships encountered by the Imperium of Man, one being the fallen ships belonging to the Death Guard Traitor Legion, the other the Imperial starships whose crew willingly turn to the worship of the Lord of Pestilence. The most dangerous of the two are the vessels belonging to the traitor Space Marines, and while many successor chapters in the current millennium can be tricked into the service of Nurgle, the majority of these vessels come from the bygone era of the Horus Heresy in the early 31st millennium. When the Primarch Mortarion made the decision to turn against his father, the Emperor of Mankind, the expeditionary ships of the Legion were the first to get corrupted, thus becoming the first plague ships, or poison ships as they sometimes were called. Many of these expertly crafted vessels were operated by the Adeptus Mechanicus alongside the Death Guard Legion. Most were either frigates or second-line cruisers in classification. They were outfitted to operate alone on deep-range independent missions and retrofitted to bear the deadliest cargoes, toxic, pathogenic, and viral weaponry. Their new evil tasks were to carry out dark pilgrimages across the stars, conducting raids and visitations, often covertly, on isolated colony worlds, imperial outposts, and linchpin sectors, spreading contagion, contaminating water supplies, and tainting biospheres. Although these attacks were on many worlds to slay millions, not simply by plague and poison, but by civil unrest, famine, and anarchy that would often follow in their wake, their main purpose was not wholesale annihilation. Instead, it was to create panic, to spread fear, to wound and weaken the Imperium ahead of a traitorous advance rather than outright destroy. For a wounded world demanded costly aid and assistance from its allies, whereas a dead world required nothing. For this reason, Exterminatus-class weaponry was rarely employed by the poison ships, but more insidious and subtle agents were instead used, many of them bred and manufactured by the Magos biologists in the War Master's faction, or within the bioweapon vaults and the laboratoria of the dreaded Death Guard world killer, the Mia Donamori, which had been darkly infamous for its stockpiles of such weaponry long before the outbreak of the war. Once the nature and tactic of these poison ships became widely known by the Loyalists, they unsurprisingly became a priority target for destruction, and were hunted down wherever they were encountered. The desire to purge the threat of the poison ships was so great that specific hunter-killer missions were launched against them by several separate Loyalist factions and legions during the Great Scouring, and Terra itself placed a high bounty on the destruction of such vessels, drawing the attention of rogue traders and even unaligned renegades and corsair forces to the task. Not all plague ships were destroyed. Many successfully fled into the Eye of Terror and furthered their descent into corruption as the God of Decay spread his gifts to these stolen Imperial battleships. It became the duty of the Sixth Plague Company of the Death Guard Traitor Legion to master and garrison all of the Voidcraft that evaded the destruction during the Great Scouring. Known as the Ferrymen, these Plague Marines worked with the Dark Mechanicus to organize the Legion's rotting armadas of vital resources for the now demon Primarch Mortarion. To this day, the Death Guard and many war bands in the service of the God of Decay plow through the Immaterium, like wind-blown contagions, emerging into real space wherever Nurgle wills, spreading Nurgle's blessings to the wider galaxy. And then there are those plague fleets that are made up of the unlucky ship crew that fell to the temptations of chaos, whether they be colonized ships stranded in the void, or corrupted navy captains who handed over the souls of their crewmen. These ships are now in the service of Nurgle, and their mission is to spread the joy of never-ending decay. Sometimes the Lord of Pestilence doesn't always have to try very hard to add a new ship to its fleet. Imperial ships are crammed, claustrophobic places at best of times, and the air which feeds their living crew is a commodity that must be endlessly recycled and filtered back into the vessel. Such lifeless air like this often becomes stale, and the stench of sweat and grime hangs heavy in the air, like a games workshop with a bunch of wargamers. Under their mask of filth, Nurgle and his dedicated followers find little difficulty in spreading his diseases through the vessel. Such plagues aboard ships are not uncommon, and Nurgle laughs gleefully at such works. A ship's entire crew may weaken beneath this malady, and in such desperation they will turn to Nurgle for protection, and so a new plague ship is born. Its crew spared the sorrow of death, but instead gifted an eternity beset by the same plague which first laid them low. But decay doesn't merely affect the living. Nurgle beams all the more proudly to see the creations of mortals broken down by decay. The most virulent of these ills do not only strike at the flesh, but also bring with them a noxious, stinging acidic feel to the air, which can sicken even the metal of the warship. Within a small matter of time, the once marvel of human engineering is bursting with rust and filth. It's now property of Nurgle, and its crew becomes a part of the god's grand plague fleet. And the last of the four Chaos God is Khorne. For those battleships whose captain and crew have been devoted to the blood god Khorne, they become chariots of slaughter. To all but the blindest and most deranged of Khorne's followers, the need for a ship to transport them across the stars is obvious, though beyond such cold utility, even the most ancient of vessels deserve little more reverence. To Khorne's followers, such vessels are nothing more than a steed or a chariot to take them to a new field of slaughter. Where other gods might visit their blessings equally upon their followers and their machines, Khorne cares little for the beasts of steel, and it is instead upon the deranged and bloodthirsty warriors that slay in his name that Khorne's blessings fall. It is rare to spot a chariot of slaughter with more than the most basic long-range weaponry. Even a perfectly well-armed and equipped warship of Khorne may forego all weapon fire as its frenzied crew plow furiously forward, impatient to fall upon the enemy in hand-to-hand combat within the narrow confines of the enemy vessel. They are so insanely devoured by the lust for blood that some forsake any form of ranged weaponry entirely, and instead populate drifting space hulks, from where they can fall upon the enemy fleet or even an entire world in an unstoppable tide of boarding actions or bloody planetary assaults, much like the Greenskins. And although this can prove to be a huge disadvantage, Khorne is not blind to the need for firepower. His fleets remain rigidly utilitarian in their regard, willingly only to utilize those weapons and those tactics which will ultimately bring them closer to their target, closer to the slaughter. It's also important to note that although the crews of these massive brass chariots are tasked with keeping the battleship operational, they are still worshippers of Khorne, and as such, they live to wage war, and to them, it doesn't matter where they fight, only that they do. Skirmishes inside huge engine rooms or hangar bays break out throughout the entire voyage. Some of these Khornate crewmen fight to gain power, others simply want the glory of martial prowess in the hope of pleasing the god of war. Through ruthless and unending slaughter, ship slaves can rise through the ranks and eventually cast off their shackles and butcher as free men. Regardless of the reason, a mortal trapped aboard a chariot of slaughter has only carnage in his future, for they have stepped into the path of skulls, and skulls is all their patron asks for. No one is safe aboard these ships. Every crewman is a target, a potential stepping stone to eternal glory. Any voidsmen won't hesitate to kill their own leader to gain the favor of their god. This means that only the toughest specimens can keep the title of a captain aboard these twisted ships. Champions in their own rights. Because of this, the captains of these ships are respected by the bloodthirsty demigods known as Khornate berserkers. A captain of a chariot of slaughter has a long and gruesome kill list. They have murdered in the name of the blood god till every last shred of their morality is abandoned, and they are transformed into sadistic monsters whose only desire is to look down from the gore-splattered bridge as entire sectors are washed in blood. The role of protecting navigators and astropaths falls to the captain, a task made difficult by Khorne's hatred for the Psyker. The demonic legions of the Blood God seek out these foul beings and crave their blood above most. Ship captains sequester these vital individuals and butcher any would-be assassin that attempts to collect their skulls. But make no mistake, the psyker aboard one of Khorne's ships has a terrible life. Often chained up and placed inside tiny cages with only the barest minimum to survive. Most go insane due to the brutality and the neglect. Similar to all Chaos fleets, Khorne's ships are constantly bathed in dark energies. The clamor of battle and the stench of murder overwhelms these battleships. Most aboard these massive chariots of slaughter completely lose their sanity as they are consumed by an ever-increasing lust for violence and gore. The perfect environment to strengthen the Blood God's legions, even away from his realm of chaos. Now I do want to throw in an extra one for Chaos Undivided, or I guess you could say, now we don't have the description of what the fleets of Vashdor look like just yet, because he's not really a god, but we do have Chaos Undivided, and that is found with the Iron Warriors and their fleet. A soul harvester is like no spacefaring ship in existence. It is a massive spaceborne fortress factory created by the warpsmiths of the Iron Warriors Legion. It consists of a central demon forge surrounded by snaking tentacles of hell-forged metal. These parasitic engines embed themselves deep into a target planet's crust, their boarding tentacles disgorging Iron Warriors into weak points in the enemy defenses. Meanwhile, the roaring furnace at the structure's heart feeds upon flesh, metal, and the souls of the slain in order to spew out fresh demon engine reinforcements from the world's own resources in order to support the heretical Astarte invasion. The insides of a soul harvester is a twisted and cramped domain. It teeters between dimensions. Metal corridors pulsate as if belonging to a living being, and in truth, the insides of a soul harvester are very similar to a massive spacefaring creature. Each ferrocrete and plasteel wall moves as if attempting to come to life through the ruinous touch of chaos. Leering faces follow the passengers, jealous of their corporeal existence. The screams of the tortured are overshadowed by the otherworldly roars of caged demons waiting to be set free or enslaved inside the bodies of demon engines. Thousands upon thousands of slaves and servitors toil away, running across hallways and launch bays, ever vigilant of their master's whip, or even worse, an escaped demon that could tear them limb from limb. It's hard to tell what is from this world and what exists trapped between the immaterium and real space. Ghosts and revenants perform the same movements over and over again, as if trapped in their own minds, reliving the same action for all eternity. And then there's the loud and thunderous sounds of Iron Warriors training their cultists, prepping them for war. Although to most, it seems as if these chaotic demigods are simply torturing slaves. More of a spaceborne factory than a starship, this metal monster was powered by an immense live demon forge, a product of the Iron Warriors' darkest experiments in metamorphosis and warp engineering. It would be the first such creation to be tested in battle during the Taladis War, launched by Khor Pharaon against the Taladis system in the Veritas subsector. With its vast alpine ranges and city-sized citadel fortresses, the fortress world of Grandask was the most heavily defended planet in the Taladis system, aside from their capital cardinal world of Benediction itself. Its 7 great hive cities provided billions of souls for the Astra Militarum, and its deep reserves of promethium and the super-dense minerals only added to Grandask's critical value to the Imperium, making it an irresistible target to chaos. It would be the soul harvester, Skarax Krond, that latched itself to the surface of the planet like an immense parasite, thrusting pseudopods the size of half-blocks deep into the earth. These snaking tentacles pulverize their way through the rock and stone with siege drills and melta-cannons before bursting up from the earth within the walls of the planet's citadel fortifications. Heretical Astarte warriors marched forth, unleashing deadly volleys of bolt-around into the unprepared foe. At the same time, Chaos Knights lumbered from the gatehouses of the Soul Harvester, bellowing oaths of destruction as they set upon the armored formations of the Astra Militarum. Tank after tank was blasted into molten slag, and the arcs of heavy bolter fire obliterated entire formations of the planet's infantry. All the while the Soul Harvester glutted itself upon the aura of death and destruction. Blasted corpses and twisted wreckages of shattered war machines were shoveled into its furnaces, as the warpsmith, Etrogar, and his Iron Warriors stoked the hellish fires with the souls of the slain. The Soul Harvester spewed out tides of demon engines, from scuttling spider-like venom crawlers to hulking mauler fiends that galloped into battle, eager to mutilate and destroy. Soon the Loyalists were in full flight, retreating to the polar citadels of Fortress Resolve, where they prepared to make their final stand. Just as the cruisers of the Iron Warriors prepared orbital bombardments that would blast open the last pieces of resistance on the planet, the Chaos Fleet picked up a surge of warp disturbances. Suddenly, 2 enemy capital ships dropped out of orbit. They were black vessels bearing the stark white cross of the Righteous Black Templars chapter. Castle Andromos led a single strike force detached from the Ruthenian Crusade, all that could be spared due to the Black Templars' extensive campaigns elsewhere across the Segmentum Solar. Fortunately, Dramos could also call upon the cadres of Imperial Knights from House Morton, commanded by the dour yet ferocious Sir Dirkwold. Dramos scanned the latest tactical cognition broadcast from the Fortress of Resolve. The situation was grim. The Iron Warriors were besieging the Polar Citadel, pouring demonic forces against the shield wall, while their siege tanks kept up a relentless bombardment. Yet the true threat, Dramos quickly realized, was the Soul Harvester. As long as the Soul Harvester's Demon Forge was operational, the traitors could replenish their forces indefinitely. It was then decided that Strikeforce Dawnhammer would deploy in a decisive attack upon the Soul Harvester. The warriors of House Morton made for the surface of the planet in their fortified bulwark landers, the heavily armored vessels shrugging off reams of flak fire. Sir Dirkwold led a frontal assault upon the Soul Harvester. From the parapets of the Demon Forge, Iron Warriors poured a stream of fire down upon the advancing Loyalist. While the Knights drew the attention of the Chaos Defenders, squads of Inceptors descended upon the Soul Harvester like living comets. Burning through the upper atmosphere and locking coordinates upon the pulsating shuttle of the Harvester, they struck home with shattering force, breaching holes in the flesh metal carapace with demolition charges, even as they fended off flocks of fire-spitting Helldrakes. Castle Andromos led the assault into the heart of the Soul Harvester, battling through the innards of the Iron Monster alongside a retinue of veteran Crusaders. The assault team suffered grievous wounds as the Iron Warriors assailed them at every turn, but in an act of self-sacrifice that would mark their names in the honor scrolls of their order, Dramos and his command squad managed to detonate a cyclonic charge at the heart of the structure. The resulting warp explosion swept through the Soul Harvester, immolating loyalists and heretics alike, and blasting its assembly halls and factories to atoms. The Soul Harvester convulsed and thrashed its metal tendrils like a wounded animal, but its demonic furnace would not be snuffed out that easily. Dramos' sacrifice brought the defenders of the planet precious time, but the planet's fate still hung in the balance. And that concludes our deep dive into the ships of Chaos. I hope you guys enjoyed. More deep dives on Chaos to come because it seems like you guys really enjoy it. Do me a favor, hit the like button, comment down in the comment section below. If you comment within the first 2 days, it really helps out the channel, so thank you guys so much. You could also support us by hitting us up with the super thanks or supporting us on Patreon, link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk tomorrow. This is Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.